doing? Well, good afternoon. Are we on here? Okay. Maybe I'll move this up a little bit. I know. That's what they tell me. I don't know. All right. Oh, yeah? Oh, look at that. Thank you. You're my hero. Thank you. All right. Thanks. Well, good afternoon. This is a session on underwater basket weaving. If you're not here for that, feel free to leave. No, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Yeah, Gene?
I did join an underwater basket weaving class, but then a Navajo joined the course and screwed up the curve.
I think I'll leave that one alone. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, my name is Dave Kallman, and I'm an attorney in Lansing. And we have a law practice. My son and I, Stephen Kallman has been an attorney for about 11 years now. And we practice, we have a general practice in all the various areas most attorneys do, Kallman Legal Group. And we've been coming to week 7 for, 35 years, something like that. Yeah, it's just for a while. So we enjoy it and did a session last week, and Gary asked and talked with Dr. Lutzer, and they said they'd like to have me come back and do it again, and it worked out my schedule to do it today. So we also work with Great Lakes Justice Center, and you might have seen brochures in the back and some information there and cards, and we'll talk a little bit about that and what Great Lakes Justice Center does. And it's a 501c3 nonprofit legal group, and we represent lots of folks on different issues. We'll get into that. So before we get going, let's have a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for your goodness to us, and for Maranatha, for the opportunities we have here to come and relax and refresh, but also learn more from your word through the week. We pray for the speakers as the week goes on and finishes up, and that'll be a good time, family time for everyone here. Bless our time today. Open our hearts and minds to your word and what you have to say to us as we look at the times that we're facing and as we try to figure out and navigate our culture today. So bless our time in your name. Amen. All right. Well, Great Lakes Justice Center started about 8 years ago. Professor William Wagner and I and my son Stephen, we started it because we saw so many issues starting to come. And what prompted us was in Lansing, Delta Township on the west side, if you're familiar with that. They had an ordinance that was being proposed to LGBT rights, to approve of them and that sort of thing. So we kind of came together, and a lot of churches in the area and came together on that issue. And then just some discussions arising out of that, we decided to be a little more organized and start up an organization. And we do cases all over the country, really, but we do focus more in the Midwest and especially Michigan, obviously, because we're here. Professor Wagner is a constitutional attorney. He just retired from Cooley Law School a couple years ago after about 20 years. He's a former federal judge. He's a former U.S. attorney back in the Reagan years, and prosecuted obscenity cases back then. And at the time, back in the mid-'80s, he got the largest verdict in American history against a pornographer. It was hundreds of millions of dollars that they got, and in a criminal prosecution. He also was a diplomat to Africa. He's had a pretty varied career. And I've been in private practice pretty much my whole life. I've had a partnership at a couple of different times. In fact, Chuck Fleck's here today. We started out together in our law office back a couple years ago. And Chuck and Jan introduced my wife and I, so we owe them a big debt of gratitude, so it's great to see you guys. But I've been practicing with my son now for about 11 years, and so wanted to talk today. And again, I just want to say thank you to Maranatha, to Gary, Dr. Lutzer, and everyone who's had a hand in making this happen today, and to you for taking time out to be here today. Well, Great Lakes Justice Center does a number of things. We do training and education. Great Lakes is a subsidiary of Salt and Lake Global. So if you ever look at Salt and Lake Global, plug that in on the internet. That's more of our teaching arm, and it's a mission-oriented organization that's been around for over 20 years. Professor Wagner started it a long time ago. And then we put Great Lakes Justice Center underneath the umbrella of Salt and Lake Global. And one of the things that we do is we have training sessions that William has done for the most part, and a few other people with him, where he's been down in Peru, he's been in Colombia, he's been in other Central American countries, and he goes down and he trains and teaches judges, prosecutors, legislators in these countries on natural law, constitutional principles, biblical principles in the law, that sort of thing. So that's one branch. We do a lot of training and seminars with Great Lakes. We have student interns in the summer. One of our interns is a Hillsdale grad who is now going to MSU Law School, and it's called our Wilberforce Academy. And so we do lots of things like that. We do a lot of appellate work. We do cases that we take ourselves, that we're representing folks in various appellate courts. When I say appellate courts, I mean federal cases around the country. And handle those, and we do many briefs in the Supreme Court in Washington. And we have filed those as amicus briefs. If you're familiar with an amicus brief, it just means like friend of the court. And you can file a brief if you have organizations or individuals who are interested in a particular case. You can petition the court and ask for leave to file this amicus brief, this friend of the court brief. We've probably filed, I don't know, a dozen or 15 or so amicus briefs in the U.S. Supreme Court over the last 5-6 years. In fact, here's a couple of examples if anybody is interested. The Obergefell case, remember that one, Judge, that one didn't turn out so well for us on that one, same-sex marriage. Currently, the Dobbs case. How many of you are familiar with Dobbs and what's going on with that right now? Well, you should be, because that case could be the case that overturns Roe v. Wade. And it's the Mississippi law that they had banned abortions after 15 weeks, unless it's the health of the mother, that sort of thing. So that's challenged, and it is now in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court accepted the case, which was really quite surprising. We were one of only a handful of organizations that filed an amicus brief urging the court to take the case. And surprise, surprise, they did. A lot of folks did not think they would take the case, and they did. And then we just filed our brief in the Dobbs case, and we'll see what they do. If the court, because this is a golden opportunity for the court to take some action. In this case, we're representing the National Catholic Bioethics Center and pro-life obstetricians and gynecologists from around the country, and Right to Life of Michigan. Those are our clients in that case. The Obergefell case, we represented, there's a national coalition of black pastors, African-American pastors around the country, 25,000 strong, and we represented them in that Obergefell case. So we also do some litigation where we actually bring lawsuits, file lawsuits, and start it right out in district court and federal court and then take them on up. So we're very involved in all the different levels of the federal court. We also do many issue briefs. We call them fact sheets, things like that. If you go to our website, it's greatlakesjc.org. Also, there's some brochures in the back if you're interested, and you can feel free to pick one up or take some more if you need some extras. But we do often do things like this, fact sheets, issue briefs, and you can download these. They're available at our website on all kinds of issues. This one's a guide, actually. We did a legal guide, policies for churches and religious institutions. So some sample language dealing with all kinds of issues that are facing churches and what you might want to include in your bylaws and that sort of thing. Public school transgender policies is another one. And we go into a lot of analysis. It's about 13, 14 pages long. So if you're interested in that, feel free to go to the website and you can pick up those kinds of things. Also, we have a publication side. Here's a book Professor Wagner wrote, Tyranny of the Few. So that's an example. He wrote this that's actually been used in constitutional law classes around the country, God, Man, and the Constitution. And actually, we've been revising this, and a new edition is going to be coming out soon. Those are the sorts of things that we do at Great Lakes. Feel free to, like I say, come to the website, and we have a contact spot there. If you have a case that you think might be up our alley, let us know. Give us the facts. The areas we cover, of course, are constitutional law issues, First Amendment, those sorts of things, religious liberty, religious conscience. Pro-life, sanctity of life is a big issue that we want to be involved in, freedom of speech, family law and education, those sorts of things. So, sure, it's greatlakesjc.org. And if you get a brochure or a card back there, the website's on there. So feel free to take a look and download anything that you think will be helpful. Well, Gary asked me last week and this week to speak about some of the cultural issues, and it seems appropriate, given what Dr. Lutzer's speaking about this week and others, that, oh, I didn't see you in the back. Oh, okay, thank you. I feel blessed now, thank you. Boy, I was going to say all kinds of stuff about him now, but he's here. I don't know, I can't. No, I just felt like there's so much going on in our country right now, and we get inundated. We've been getting literally hundreds of calls on the vaccine issue and the masks and all that sort of thing, so we'll touch on that as we talk here. My plan is to go for about a half hour or so and then leave it open for question and answers, because that's where I find a lot of the best stuff comes out is your questions, and we'll try to answer them. If I can't answer, if I don't know the answer off the top of my head, which surprisingly happens, I will commit to check it out and get back with you and give you the best answer we can. So Gary asked me to talk about these issues this week, and I thought at first I'd maybe just give you a little flavor of a few of the cases that we've handled to give you an idea of the types of things we do. But if you are aware, like last week when we were here, there were there was a group of 20 or 25 parents that came last week from Whitehall, and any of you know Whitehall is just north of here. And their public schools posted a survey on their school website telling the students to not tell their parents about the survey or let them see it or anything else, and then ask the most intrusive questions you could ever imagine. Asking about their fantasy life, asking about their private life, if you know what I mean, okay? Just incredibly inappropriate. And so, of course, they're all up in arms about that. When that got out, the school immediately took it down, tried to claim that they really weren't, trying to do it. But those kinds of things are happening all over the country, folks. It's not just in the big cities or in San Francisco or places like that. So a few of the cases, some of you might know Carl Mankey, the Owasso barber, who stayed open and kept cutting hair last year, and the state of Michigan went after him and attacked him. They've gone at him 5 different ways, and so far we've won 4 of those cases against him. One of them had to go all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court, and we won. And have been able, and he stayed open the whole time cutting hair, and has not had one case of COVID or any, sickness coming out of his barbershop, despite the state contact tracing over 3,000 people. That they tried their best to find somebody that caught the virus at his barbershop, and they could not do it. They couldn't prove it. And we're still down to one. We have one case left. Our State Health Department has fined him $9,000 for staying open. Even though we've won these other cases, they tried to prosecute him criminally. They've tried all kinds of stuff. They tried to throw him in jail, and every single time we've prevailed in court. Thank God for that. I mean, it's been amazing. Yeah, thank him. And let me just say, I get people coming up and, oh, it's so good. Look, I'm just a lawyer. I'm just an attorney, okay? I take cases that God puts in our path, and we do the best we can. The results, it's like John Quincy Adams said. I like to quote him a lot. John Quincy Adams said, duty is ours, results are God's, you know? So if I lose a case, hey, I look at it as long I've done my best. It's there. You know, God's got a bigger plan that I can't necessarily see, so I'm not going to lose sleep over it, you know? We win a case, it's not because I'm Perry Mason or something. That's the way God wanted it to turn out, you know? And he's using our group and, frankly, thousands of other lawyers around the country to do these sorts of things. So we're not any better than anybody else or anything like that. But we're honored, and it really has been an honor to represent Carl Mankey. He's been a great client. We've represented dozens and dozens of other businesses around the state. In fact, we have a case right now in federal court on takings. How many of you have ever heard of the takings clause in the federal Constitution? My brother. Where'd you hear that? I don't know. And Michigan's Constitution has a takings clause. People think of it more along lines of eminent domain. Have you ever heard of that? Sure. Everybody does. So government wants to take your house for a highway to put it in. They can take your house. But what do they have to do? They got to pay you for it, right? They have to give you fair and just compensation. Well, we're arguing last year when Governor Whitmer had her unconstitutional orders in place for 8 months, and our Supreme Court finally ruled that they were unconstitutional. She did not have the authority to do what she did, that was a taking of their business by the state, and that they should be paid a fair and just compensation. So this is going to be a very, very closely watched case. Because if we win this case, the floodgates are going to open, because there are literally thousands of businesses in Michigan that, you know, either went out of business or lost a lot of money over the last year and a half. So that's a big one. Some of you might remember the Planet Fitness case over transgender bathrooms. We brought that lawsuit in federal court, actually in state court, sorry. And it went up to the Michigan Supreme Court, and we won. You know how there are always mixed decisions. Lost on some of our counts, but won on enough of them. We got sent back, and we finally got a resolution and a settlement with Planet Fitness. We also do, believe it or not, we try to stay out of court. You know, it's always best. You know, what does Proverbs say? A soft answer turns away wrath, right? See, I knew you guys would know. We don't go in guns a-blazing, oh, we're lawyers, we're going to, you know, come kick you around the courthouse or something. No, it's like, how can we try to resolve this and do it in a way that's, you know, is satisfactory to everybody? And, for example, we got a call last year from a senior. His center, the senior center that he went to in Ithaca, Michigan, had a federal program that provided lunches for seniors. And so they would pray before every meal, 3 times a week during these meals. And they'd been doing it for 20 years. A new director came in and told them you can no longer pray before the lunches because it's a federally funded program. Well, we sent a letter and laid out the law and how that was, you know, clearly a violation of the First Amendment. And they agreed, and their attorney got involved and agreed, and we settled it, and they started having their prayers again. So we did not have to file a lawsuit there. We try to do that as much as we can. Attacks on Christians are increasing. You know, they're attacking the family. The Marxist ideas that are being, you know, inculcated in our kids are just crazy. I mean, everybody in here is probably an oppressor, you know, in one way or another. Did you know that? You know, you're an oppressor. This sort of thing. How do we respond to these things? You know, surprisingly, I have a book that I've been reading since last week. I don't know if you recognize this or not. Thank you. Well, Richard and Becky Stone gave me a free copy, Pastor. I didn't pay for it. They gave me a free copy that they paid for. So it's even better, you know. But honestly, I said last week too, We Will Not Be Silenced by Dr. Lutzer. If you don't have this book, you have to get this book and read it. I'm telling you that it is so insightful. It distills these arguments down into something even I can understand. It's really, really good. And I just want to quote a couple of things that Dr. Lutzer says, because it does kind of set the stage for what we're talking about here. He says in the book, everything might seem normal among us. We have our homes, our vocations, and our salaries. And he's talking about the wasp. Any of you who've read Orwell, you know about the wasp who was cut in half and kept going until it realized he was cut in half. He says, like the wasp, we continue because we still have elections. We're content. We still have courts. We have Congress. We have a president. We're still able to preach the gospel in our churches. But recently, we faced the health pandemic, economic crisis, heightened racial conflict, and political wrangling, and goes on from there. The underbelly of our nation is being eaten away, and like Orwell's wasp, we might not recognize the condition we're in. The America we thought we knew is no more. Then he says this, I want to inspire us to have the courage to walk toward the fire and not run away from the flames. And honestly, folks, that's what we're doing, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. Dare to be a Daniel, folks. Can you dare to be a Daniel in our culture, in your sphere of influence? Because that's what's really important. He goes on, God's brought us to this cultural moment. Our future cannot be taken for granted. As has been said, in a time of universal deception, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So I'm telling you, folks, you got to get this book. It's really, really good. You know, I'd like to give you a few examples. I mean, we've seen this coming for a long time. My dad was a judge here in Michigan. He was a nominee for Supreme Court in Michigan back in the 80s, was very involved politically. Stephen's now third generation in our family of lawyers. I think that's kind of a good thing, maybe. I'm not sure. But I can remember when I was a kid, my dad talking about, how many of you remember in the early 60s, the prayer decision? Any of you? Yeah. Prayers getting kicked out and things. I can remember hearing him talk about this stuff 50 years ago, literally, and being involved in doing things to try to stop what we're seeing like a roller coaster coming at us today. So this is not something that's just happened in the last couple of years. This has been coming on for a long time, and we need to wake up to it. I've had situations in court that I've been privileged to have been involved in with name calling and other things. You know, folks, you can't let that dissuade you. Somebody calls you a name, so what? You know? It becomes more clear, more of an issue is, are you going to lose your job? You know? If you talk a certain way or you refuse a vaccine or you do something, are you going to lose your job? Now it's getting more real, isn't it? I've had a couple situations, especially we did a lot of homeschool cases in Michigan. Michigan back in the 80s was about the worst state in the country to homeschool. And it's totally regulated. The state's position was you had to be a certified teacher to teach your kids at home. Well, that knocks out 99% of everybody, right? So we brought cases and cases and cases, and I can honestly say, with God's help in all of this, that area of the law involving homeschools, we never lost a case. It's probably the only area I can say that, because all lawyers lose cases. But in the homeschooling area, we won every single case, and we had hundreds of them around the state. Worked with HSLDA. Many of you probably know Mike Ferris. He's now with ADF. Chris Klicka was a real good friend of mine. He would come, stay overnight with us, and we'd go argue cases and do things. So I had a real pleasure, privilege to work with them over the years. But let me just give you a couple of quick examples. How many of you have heard of the case People versus DeYoung? It's DeJonge. See, that was the case in Michigan that opened it up for homeschoolers. And all of a sudden, we went from being one of the worst states to one of the best states. It's a 1993 decision by our Michigan Supreme Court, finding that the DeYoungs, the parents in our case, had the right under the First Amendment to, based on their freedom of religion, free exercise, to educate their children at home without a certified teacher. And it was a huge decision. That case went on for 10 years. It started back in 1983. I was only out of law school for 6 months. I was just out starving, didn't have any clients, living off my wife, like all good lawyers do, She's a nurse. And Mike Ferris calls me up one day and he goes, "Dave, are you out of law school yet?" I said, "Yeah, I'm out." He goes, "Well, we got a case for you in Michigan." And so it started then. The DeYoungs at that time had 2 children. And we always used to joke that if we couldn't stretch the case, that we're of school age, that if we couldn't stretch the case out long enough to where they were old enough that they couldn't go after him anymore, we weren't very good lawyers if we couldn't delay this. But the problem was they kept having kids. They ended up with 10 kids. So that shot our theory down. I mean, it just wasn't working. But we had 7 decisions in that case over the 10 years go against us. It went up to the Supreme Court a couple times, Court of Appeals back down, different things that were happening. 7 straight decisions against us in 10 years. We got to the Michigan Supreme Court for the final decision in the case. And we were told this from a clerk at the Supreme Court later that told us that this had happened. The court gets together and they meet the week before they issue their final opinions in a particular, on a bunch of cases. So they'll meet like Thursday and Friday, making sure everybody's signed on it right and who did what opinion, that sort of thing. And then they release all the opinions the following week, usually Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Well, we were told that when that meeting was held at the end of the week before, we had lost the case. It was 4-3 against us. And of course, we found this out after the fact. And then when the decision came out, it was 4-3 for us. And the only win we had in the whole case at the Michigan Supreme Court. And we were told what happened was one of the justices, who was a real ACLU type, somebody that we felt we didn't have a prayer, no pun intended, of getting on our side. That justice came in to talk to our Chief Justice, who had written at that point, the dissenting opinion, and said, "I don't know what's happening. I have not been able to sleep all weekend. I can't get this case off my mind. I don't know why. I just know I'm voting wrong. And I've read your opinion, and I cannot bring myself to sign on to your opinion because of his views and stuff." So he said, "Would you mind if I just wrote a short concurrence in the result and signed on to your opinion that way?" And of course, Justice Riley said, "Well, of course, that would be awesome." And so just like that, because over a weekend, one justice couldn't sleep, that case went 4-3 in favor of home education in Michigan, and now for almost 30 years, it's been great in Michigan. I'll tell you, that's probably the best example in my career of Proverbs 21:1, right? The heart of the king are like channels of water in the hands of the Lord. He directs it wherever he wants, Man, what a great example of that it was. And that's what I mean when I say, we don't claim credit here. I mean, how do we have any credit for that? That was God working there. I had another homeschool case. I'll tell you briefly. A family down in southern Michigan, southeast Michigan. They were pillars of the community. He owned a business, the dad there. Everybody knew him. He donated tens of thousands of dollars to the local public school. They were on all the PTAs and the booster clubs and everything else, right? I better make sure I'm off here. And they decided to start homeschooling. And the school went after them. And they went after them in probate court, tried to take their kids. HSLDA called. I went down for a pretrial. Now, usually a pretrial in these kinds of hearings, these kinds of cases, it's you and a prosecutor and maybe one other person, somebody from the school, something like that. And you sit down and you try to work it out. You just meet in an office. It's just a couple of people. So I get down there and I'm directed to the county commissioner room, which I thought was a little odd. And I go in and here's this huge conference table, probably 20 people sitting around it. And they were everybody from local police and county sheriffs to prosecutors to CPS workers, I mean, you name it. They had all these people, and they had one seat open in the middle. And directly across from that seat was the superintendent, who obviously had, for whatever reason, had the political power in that town. You could tell. Everybody deferred to him. So I come in, and I say, well, this is interesting. And I sit down. Prosecutor's at the end, and I said, so what are we doing? And the prosecutor doesn't start talking. The superintendent starts talking to me. And he says, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. You're going to have those kids back in the public school Monday morning at 8 o'clock, or we're going to be taking them away, et cetera, et cetera. And I looked at him, and I thought, well, okay, it's obvious this case isn't going to settle or resolve, so I might as well start sizing up the witnesses, you know, and seeing if I might be able to poke or prod a little bit or how they react, that sort of thing. So I looked at the superintendent, and I said, who are you? You know, just real kind of like, who are you? Why am I talking to you? He goes, well, I'm the superintendent. I said, well, good for you. I said, who's the prosecutor? And this guy at the end raised his hand. I said, why aren't you talking? Why aren't you and I talking here? Well, I don't want to talk to this guy. He doesn't have any authority to do anything. And, he turned beet red and was really upset, you know. And so I thought, well, I'm going to prod him a little more, you know, just see, because I'm going to be calling this guy as a witness, right? So I asked him a few more questions, and the circumstances that led to this, you're not going to believe this. Here's this family, 6 kids, all through the school system. The oldest son had been in a car accident at lunchtime and was nearly dead. He was at the hospital. Now, thankfully, he pulled through. The parents, of course, they find out. They're rushing to the schools, grabbing their kids, rushing to the hospital, that sort of thing. Mom shows up at the high school to say, I'm here to get our 2 sons. You know, Jason's in the hospital. We have to go. The principal was there and said, well, wait a minute. You can't take the kids. And she looks at him and goes, what do you mean I can't take the kids? Well, because school's not over. You don't have the authority to take the kids. And it's actually what he said to this mother in that scenario. Can you imagine that? So she said, I kind of lost my salvation for a minute. Said a few choice words I shouldn't have said. And I said, I'm going to get my boys, you know, and I don't care what, we'll talk about this later. And he says, if you walk out that door and start walking down the hall, I will have you arrested. She walked out the door. He had her arrested and took her in to the county sheriff as she was getting booked. Now, that's why they pulled their kids out of the schools. Now, I mean, can you believe this? So that's the scenario. So I look at the superintendent, and he goes, we have a great school, and they should just be back, and everything will be hunky-dory and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, you know, maybe my clients might have been interested in that if you hadn't arrested her. And this guy, blew. And I'll never forget, he leans across the table at me, points his finger at me, and he says, when those kids cross the schoolhouse door, they're mine. The parents have nothing to do with it, and the sooner they learn that, the better. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room. Because here you got all these CPS workers and police officers and everybody, you know, and they're all looking at this guy like, what? So I took my pad of paper that I had next to me, and there's people next to me, and I slammed it down on the table next to me with a pen. I put a pen on it. I said, I want your name, address, telephone number. And then I want that to get passed around, and I looked at the prosecutor. I want everybody's name, address, telephone number on this pad because this is my witness list for our trial. I'm going to get 6 parents from your community on this case, put them on a jury, and then I'm going to put this guy in the stand and I'm going to ask him, did you just say what you just said? That those kids belong to you and the parents, you know, and everybody's like in shock. And I said, this is awesome. I said, this has been one of the best pre-trials I've had in a long time. I said, thank you so much. I said, I really appreciate this meeting we've had. I said to the prosecutor, I want this list, and if you won't get it for me, I'm going to go to the judge. I'm going to get an order. Nobody had better leave this room without giving me their name and address. And then I said, because I know when I put him on the stand, he'll lie. I've run into people like you, and you should have seen it. He was like, I said, I know you'll lie. You'll claim you didn't say it. And then I'm going to call each and every one of you, one after another, and put you on the stand and say, did he just say what he just said? And some of you might lie. I looked around the room. I said, but I dare say there's some God-fearing people in this room that won't lie. And I saw a couple of the officers nodding their heads at me, like this, and I went like this. I said, all right, we're done here. And I walked out. So I go out, my clients are like, what was going on in there? We hear yelling and, all this guy's, it's just lawyer stuff. Don't worry about it. So prosecutor comes out 5 minutes later. My pad of paper, it's empty. There's no names on it. I said, all right, let's go find the judge. Nobody better leave. He goes, no, you don't understand. We're dismissing the case. So there's another example of God intervening, right? I mean, I couldn't have had that. I couldn't have tried to set something up like that. I mean, it was just amazing. But it's indicative, folks, that now this is 25, 30 years ago, okay? Multiply that by 100, by 1,000 now, because that's what you're running into everywhere, is people who think like that. They think your kids are theirs, okay? And that you don't have any rights at all. We had another case I'll just mention briefly. I represented a probate judge in Michigan who started, I admired his courage. Michigan has a bypass law for minors if they want an abortion and the parents won't give permission. You can go to the probate judge in your county and get permission to, give consent to have the abortion performed for the minor girl. And that's something that is done every day of the week all over Michigan. Well, one probate judge decided, well, hey, if I've got to make this decision, I'm going to appoint a guardian ad litem for the unborn child in every single case that comes before me, because they're asking to kill the child. That child should be represented in my courtroom. And he issued a blanket order. Everybody's entitled to a guardian ad litem for the unborn child if one of these cases comes before me. Well, of course, the ACLU hated that. And Judge Robertson, who I had in law school as a professor, hired us, and we filed a brief with the Michigan Supreme Court, and we won. And what happened is the Supreme Court did not want to rule on the issue of whether or not an unborn child was a person for obvious reasons, right? So they skipped around that argument that we were making and instead focused on a procedural technicality and just said, well, the judge did things right and the ACLU is wrong, so he can enter an order if he wants to. And so they ruled our way, but they wouldn't rule on the big issue. So that's what you find a lot of times with courts. They'll skirt around it, and if they can try to find some other way to issue an opinion, they'll do so. Well, how do we respond to this? This is going on all over the place. Obviously, by Dr. Lutz's book. No. Obviously, prayer. I mean, and I can't emphasize that enough, how important. People always say, oh, let's just pray, And how many of us go home and don't pray? But I'm telling you, there is no greater power that's out there. And people are praying we have people praying on our cases all the time, and it's important. Second, be informed. No, read good books. See what's going on. Know what's going on in your community. What is your public school curriculum teaching? What are your township trustees up to? Do you even know? Do you even know who your township trustees are? They're implementing all kinds of policies, folks, that directly go against us. You need to be informed. We need to strengthen what remains. Look, we're not, at a point where we have no recourse. How many times did you see Paul appeal to his rights as a Roman citizen, right? And you see that all through Scripture. We have a right to appeal to those in authority over us. And yes, we're to pray for them. But it's clear, and this is where you get into a whole other topic of civil disobedience, which is beyond what we're going to talk about today. And I think we're fast approaching a time where that's going to be happening. I fully expect, frankly, to be thrown in jail by a judge anytime soon. I've told my wife we're putting aside some money for bail so I can get out. Because I've heard in a few cases judges are ordering attorneys to use the pronouns of a person that, just because the man thinks he's a woman now, you have to call him she or whatever. And I won't do it. I don't think a court has the authority to order me to lie. Now, I'll be polite and I'll be respectful, and let me emphasize that. I cannot emphasize enough how important demeanor is and how you approach these things. And being helpful to candidates and all those kinds of things that you can do locally. It's critical. If you come in, yelling and waving your Bible and hitting them over the head with it and things like that, you're going to lose, folks. It doesn't mean you don't use biblical principles and you don't. But again, a soft answer turns away wrath. And you should appeal as much as possible. And that includes in our system elections. It includes courts. It includes, believe it or not, the media. We've had, amazingly, a lot of real positive media coverage of our cases. And I think part of it is because of how we've handled things over the years. We're accessible. They know that we don't spin them. And we just give them straight our point of view. And reporters, believe it or not, like that. And I just got called this week. A Detroit News reporter called me up. I'm doing this article talking about this issue. And I just thought of you. Would you be willing to comment on a few things? See, that's the kind of thing. And as you work in your areas, you get that kind of respect and that kind of thing happening to you. So I cannot emphasize that enough. But strengthen what remains. Know the candidates you're voting for. Know the judges you're voting for goodness sake. Know the prosecutors you're voting for. Be involved in those things. Support those who are in the fight. ADF, ACLJ, Liberty Council. There's so many groups out here right now. Beckett Fund. And we've been around for 8 years. And all of us kind of work together. We do things back and forth and refer things back and forth. Join the fight. Again, be involved. This doesn't mean everybody in here has to run for, school board or anything like that. But can you look around, find somebody from your church or your town who shares your values, get behind them and vote and support that person, get them on the board, get 2 people on the board, get 3 people on the board. Because you control the school board, you can stop a lot of this stuff, right? You control the township supervisors, you can stop a lot of what's going on. Rest on God's promises. And this is another thing. There's so many promises to us. Just go through and see and rest on them. Believe them, And again, believe that even if you lose a particular fight, it doesn't matter. In the big scheme of things, God's in control, right? We know who wins in the end. Respond to God's urging in your life. That's important. I think a lot of people, it's not really affecting me. I've got my job, my grandkids, my whatever. My church is great. It's not really impacting us. Folks, wake up. It's impacting you every single day of the week. And if your kids are in the public schools, your grandkids, it's impacting them like crazy. Or if your kids are there, it's impacting them every single day. You need to know what's going on. Let me kind of wind down here a bit, but I don't know if you heard about this, but there was the Speaker of the House imposed a gag order on certain words that could be said on the floor of the House by congressmen and women. You can't do that. You can't say these words. Well, did you hear? One congressman stood up in the floor of the House and repeated one of the words over and over and over and over. Just said the word over and over and over in direct defiance of the Speaker's edict. And then issued a petition to try to change the issue that was involved. And the other side went crazy. Have you heard about this? They went crazy. They prosecuted him, 2-week trial. They tried to kick him out of Congress. I'm surprised you haven't heard about this. They tried to kick him out of Congress. And he fought, and finally he prevailed because of strength from his constituents and other people, and it failed. They were not able to kick him out. So let me tell you, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. This happened 185 years ago. The congressman was John Quincy Adams, former president. Lots of people forget. He went in, after he was out of office as the president, he served 16 years in Congress. And his sole issue that he fought for all 16 years was the abolition of slavery. And the Democrat Speaker of the House at that time banned anybody even uttering the word slavery. He stood up and just said, slavery, 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 and kept saying it and wouldn't shut up. Issued a petition to try to end slavery, and they went after him. You know, one person can make a difference. One person can, folks. One person in this room can do that. And then the very end of the story, 6 years later, John Quincy Adams on the floor of the House, he's giving an oration against slavery, going against it. He died on the floor of the House giving his final speech while he was there. And a little-known Illinois congressman picked up his body and carried it respectfully out of the chamber. Guess who that was? Abraham Lincoln. And what did he do about 12, 13 years later? The Emancipation Proclamation. You don't think Lincoln was influenced by hearing John Quincy Adams and seeing his zeal and his passion for what was right? One person can make a difference. I do another talk, again, we don't have time today. I call it Dare to be a Daniel. And how many of you remember the old gospel song, Dare to be a Daniel? Anybody? A few? With the risk of driving you all out of the room screaming into the afternoon, let me just do it for you. Standing by a purpose true, heeding God's command, honor them the faithful few, all hail to Daniel's band. Many mighty men are lost, daring not to stand, who for God could be a host by joining Daniel's band. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. Many giants, great and tall, stalking through the land, headlong to the earth would fall if met by Daniel's band. Hold the gospel banner high, on to victory grand. Satan and his hosts defy, and shout for Daniel's band. Join with me if you know it. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. Folks, that's our call today. And did you catch the last verse? What was the first line? Hold the gospel banner high. You know what? I can file 50 lawsuits next week, you know? And I'm not minimizing that it's important to be involved and do these things. That's not what's going to win this battle. It's a spiritual battle. We need to be involved in our churches. We need to be evangelizing more and more. We got to hold that gospel banner high, or it's all going to be for naught, right? And we all have that responsibility to do that. So I'm going to leave you with this today, with this question. Can you do less than Daniel? Will you dare to be a Daniel in your home? Will you dare to be a Daniel at work, in your business? Will you dare to be a Daniel at church? Think about that. Will you dare to be a Daniel in your neighborhood, in your community? Will you dare to be a Daniel at school, in the public square? That's what God is calling all of us to do. To be a Daniel for God in every area of our culture and society, regardless of the consequences, folks. We got to start standing up. And that's what we're doing at Great Lakes. That's what I know a lot of you in this room do. And I commend you for it, and don't tire of the fight. So I hope this has been helpful today. I'm happy to answer questions. I can stay as long as you need. And just pray that we'll all stand, right? Thanks. All right, anybody have questions? Talk about anything. Like I say, may not know. Yeah. What's that? Well, thank God. Mhm. Yeah, the question. Yeah. Well, let's take the school issue first. The question was, what about, what's happening in the schools, and that it almost appears to be like a racketeering kind of thing. Well, look, we've abdicated our duty in that sphere, and the public schools have been taken over, folks. And when you look at things like the 1619 Project, and, how many of you have ever heard of Howard Zinn? He wrote the book, A People's History of the United States. If you ever needed to know where he's coming from, just read that title. A People's History? It's Marxist to the core, okay? That's being taught in public schools all around the country. So how do you change that? It's school district by school district, parent group by parent group, and going into their schools and starting to do that. And if you can't make any headway, then I think parents have to start making some hard calls. Are they going to go to the charter school route? Are they going to go private school? And a financial cost and expense. Homeschool. There's other options that are out there. And understand that 1 hour in Sunday school is not going to offset 40 hours in the public school during the week, folks. And that doesn't mean we should abandon the public schools, don't get me wrong, okay? There are lots of good folks in the public setting, Christians teaching, doing good work. But you need to know what's happening in your school. Now, the second issue as far as the election and all of that. Well, as some of you probably know, we brought an election fraud case in Wayne County, Michigan, because we had been approached by a couple of people who were workers who had observed fraud happening firsthand down in Wayne County. And our lawsuit is the only one that actually got a ruling that was favorable on part of our lawsuit. We actually won part of our case. You don't hear about that in the media. And you do hear about the other lawyers on the other cases and dealing with Dominion and Sidney Powell and people like that, and some Michigan lawyers who are being sued for defamation. They're taking action against their law licenses, trying to argue that they were not acting properly. Nobody has sued us. Nobody's taken any action against our licenses because we didn't do anything like that. The problem with the election fraud is you look at it and you look at the numbers, and sure, it's kind of smoke, and is there something there? I wouldn't be surprised, but so far I haven't seen the real proof from the Dominion, from the computers themselves and what's happened. It's questionable, it's shaky, and part of the reason why you haven't seen the proof is you can't get to the proof, and the judges won't let them do the discovery and things like that. But let me give you an example. In Antrim County, which was a big focal point in Michigan, I'm sure you all know. And up there, it was initially like 65% for Biden, and everybody knew that can't be right. That's not possible. And so everybody's saying, see, the computers, they're flipping votes and things like that. Well, guess what really happened? You had a county clerk up there. A patch had been sent out by the computer companies to all the county clerks and election people a couple weeks before the election. Every other county in the state installed the patch. Antrim County did not, for whatever reason. And so once they then saw what had happened, they installed the patch, they reran everything, and it came out 65% Trump, 35% Biden. Then the county clerk said, well, I'm going to take each, since there are only 12,000 ballots in the whole county, we're going to hand count every single one of them. And they hand counted them all, and guess what? The vote was off by one vote. That was an error in the computer counting it. So that's not exactly a lot of evidence of widespread fraud, folks. I have an open mind on it. I'm willing to see evidence, but our case did not involve that. So I guess that's about all I can say on that.
So since most of those cases were dismissed on standing,
yes.
What recourse do we have against the court system to go back and in some way force them to do discovery?
Well, the only way is to appeal. Sure. The only recourse is to appeal those lower court decisions, which I understand there are appeals going on. So they will be appealing those decisions and go from there.
Are you appealing yours?
No, because we actually won on the main issue, which was an audit, and so we didn't have anything to really appeal. The judge agreed on that one.
First, thank you for all your work in the 80s for homeschooling, because that allowed me to pull my kids out of school last year. Homeschool, because Michigan is so easy to homeschool now. We've been fighting for 3 years on so many issues in the school, and I feel like I have been a Daniel, but at this point there's so many fires everywhere. I would like to be a David and take a rock and throw it out of the light. And so my thought now is, I'm so sick of my tax dollars going to our public school while I pay on the side. I would like to defund the public school. And how do we get into that fight?
Well,
What
the question is, how do we defund the public school or really start going after that system? Well, believe it or not, I'm reviewing some legislation right now. That's another thing we do, is we get a lot of legislators sending us their draft legislation for our input before it gets put in the hopper. So we appreciate their confidence and that sort of thing in us. But one of the bills is actually going to be, if it's put through, would set up a scholarship fund and a tax credit that every person in Michigan would have the right on your taxes to say, I want 90% of my property taxes, instead of going to the public schools, to go to this private foundation process. And then all the monies that get put over there can be used for scholarships to kids in private schools, home schools, other types of educational settings. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that as it comes out here later this year, or they might wait and introduce it next year. So those are the kinds of things that are being discussed. But again, taking over the school board, if you have enough like-minded parents to vote, Williamston, they recalled a school board member and got some stuff changed over in Williamston. So things like that, folks. Just, it takes hard work. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if you know of any class action suits that people can join with regards to employees' privacy rights. For instance, my sister-in-law works at Spectrum Health. She's being told she'll be fired if she doesn't get vaccinated. And on 9/6, FDA approval is going to be coming through, and at that time they'll have 6 weeks to either get the vaccine or leave. She's
Sure.
just one example. The other example is, for instance, where my husband works, they're being told that they're instituting vaccine passports. How does my husband have the right to protect his privacy, even if he is vaccinated?
Well, okay, that's a great question. What about vaccines, your privacy rights, and all of that? Well, let me give you a quick primer on that in about 3 minutes. Okay. Look, you have to, first off, you got to emphasize, everybody has a choice here. I mean, I don't think any less of somebody if they get the vaccine or if they don't get the vaccine. It's a personal choice. I don't think anything less of a person if they wear a mask or they don't wear a mask. It's their choice. Everybody's health situation is different. And we most certainly should not be judging people one way or the other, on these things. But that's the point. It should be left to individual choice. Whatever happened to talking to your doctor and making medical decisions for yourself and government stay out of it? Whatever happened to that? That's all they talk about on the abortion side. It's a choice between the woman and her doctor. You guys should just stay out of it, right? How many times have you heard that? Boy, that's disappeared, hasn't it? How quickly that's gone. So emphasize that first. This is personal choice. Then secondly, understand there's a big difference between government action and private action. Lots of people don't get this. You don't have a First Amendment right of free speech or free exercise of religion and that sort of thing at Walmart or at your private business. You don't have constitutional rights. And most folks don't understand that. If it's a private entity, a private business, there might be statutes, there might be discrimination laws, there might be other things that might give you some protection, but the Constitution gives you no protection. The Constitution prohibits government from taking action and encroaching on your beliefs or your speech or whatever it is. Second Amendment rights, whatever it is. So understand that. If it's a government school, if it's a government, entity of any kind, then you can make some constitutional arguments. But most of these cases and calls we're getting right now are from people who are at private businesses, private schools, things like that. Well, what can you do there? Well, in Michigan, everybody's considered at will, which means you could be fired for no reason. They don't have to have a reason to fire you. You don't have to have a reason to leave your job. You could just go. They can't keep you. Okay? It's at will. So start with that understanding. So what can you look for? Well, if you have an employment contract. Surprisingly, a lot of people have actual employment contracts. Take a look at your employment contract. See if there's any language in there that might help you. Most businesses have employee handbooks, employee rules, things like that, policies. Look at those policies, read through those, see if there's anything in there that might give you some help. As I mentioned, there could be state statutes or state laws. Like in Michigan, we have the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act. It prohibits discrimination in employment on the basis of your religious beliefs. So while you don't have a constitutional right to your free exercise of religion, you do have a right under the Elliott-Larsen Act. Okay, so you see the distinction there. Medical. If you've got a medical condition that you can't tolerate wearing a mask, or your doctor says you should not have the vaccine, because it's not good for your medical condition. Well, if they don't, that's something you can pursue, and if they won't accommodate that, you could have an ADA violation, Americans with Disabilities Act. You might have something there. So even with all of that, folks, if you could find something to hang your hat on, and a lot of these private entities are providing religious exemptions and medical exemptions. Now, whether or not they carry through and actually give them, I guess we'll see. But at least they're saying they're going to give these exemptions. But understand that it's an accommodation. They don't have to just say, oh, you have a religious exemption or objection? Oh, then we don't have to do anything. No, what the law says is they have to make a reasonable accommodation. So what's a reasonable accommodation? Who knows what courts are going to say on this issue right now. But in the past, it's been I'm sure things like getting tested to see if you have COVID once a week, could be a reasonable accommodation if you didn't have the vaccine. Wearing a mask, a court could construe that to be a reasonable accommodation. I don't know how all this is going to play out in the courts. So but understand that that's the standard, okay? And, I'll just leave it there. One last area, if it's schools, and even public or private schools, and you're running into this, look at their school policies, because a lot of times they'll have a thing that they don't discriminate on the basis of religion and a bunch of other things. It'll be right in their school policies, so use that. You can also look at past practices of businesses and schools and things like that. Finally, there's a statute, MCL 380.10, for those who like to look things up, that says schools must cooperate with parents, and it's the natural fundamental right of a parent to raise and educate their kids. And the public schools must cooperate with them in doing so. How much cooperation do you think you're getting? I'm just waiting for somebody to come along so we can sue on this statute and do it. Yeah, the site is MCL, it stands for Michigan Compiled Laws, 380.10. And actually, that language that's in that statute I wrote with another attorney. And we got that put in the law over 30 years ago because we could see this kind of thing coming down the pike back then. So it's there. It's waiting to be tested. I'm hopeful we'll be maybe one of the first cases to test it. Yes? Yeah. Yeah. Hard choices. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and if they do, that's where a lawsuit should come in at that point. Yeah. Yeah, you should sue over that.
So we were told verbally that he will not accept a mask exemption no matter what the reason is.
Bully for him. Okay.
So on that note,
And we won't accept his refusal to accept. There's a
But
massive, yeah.
on that grounds, though, we have cause to move forward.
Yes.
We have a case, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, again, how it's all going to play out, I don't know how the courts are going to. But you have grounds now because you have a medical reason and they're denying you, and they're going to make you or make your child be harmed by this. No, whatever if the doctor says it's harmful to the child and that child should not wear a mask, that's good enough. Yes. Yeah, great question. Can a hospital or a doctor refuse treatment to someone who refuses to get the vaccine? This is starting to come up. I just heard about a case where this has actually happened. A cancer treatment patient being treated was supposed to have a transplant or something, and they said, oh, you have to get the vaccine or we won't give you the transplant. Man, there's going to be mega litigation over that stuff. I mean, you're talking now into wrongful death and $1 million verdicts. I mean, I'd love to get a case like that. That's ridiculous. Yeah, Gene.
This question comes under the category whatever happened to. Let's go back to that cake case. I think they lost, but my question is, I want to know what happened. Did the Christian community support them in the case that they did lose? And did the Christian body react positively?
Which case are you talking about, Gene?
That cake decorating.
Oh, Jack Phillips, the cake maker. Yeah, I mean, so far he's now fighting again. I think the case you're thinking about, his case is still ongoing. It's the lady, Baronelle Stutzman, who had her case turned down by the Supreme Court last month or two ago. That was just atrocious. That doesn't bode well at all. That our supposedly conservative Supreme Court now would not take that case. That's awful. That's the florist who refused to do the flowers for a gay wedding. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we haven't had it yet, so I don't know exactly where it's going to go. But
Yeah.
if it goes in a non-positive direction, which it very well might.
Right.
What are our
We're talking. The question is, what about diversity and equity training and inclusion? A lot of it's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, or they'll call it bias training, or they'll call it whatever. This is happening everywhere too, both government and private entities. And what we're actually telling people here is you need to screenshot stuff because they'll take stuff down once they realize how bad it looks, you know. We're working with a police, well, I can't say where, but just some policemen, okay, and ladies who are being forced through this kind of stuff right now. And they are taping every session. So I would say tape every session because you'll invariably get these people saying things that you can then use against them. And then keep your course materials and go to their website and take screenshots of everything that's on their website, especially the atrocious anti-Christian sort of thing, and build a case that way. And yeah, we're actively reviewing some cases right now to bring lawsuits over that stuff. Yes, sir.
School system hire people to put an emphasis on teaching critical race theory
Mm-hmm.
for children. Do we do anything about that? Or?
Well, again, the school board makes those decisions. The teachers and principals and everybody make those decisions. So the only way to impact that is to take over the school board, or get your kids out of there if they're not going to. Try to exempt your students from that sort of training and teaching. The problem is it's throughout their curriculum now. They're even including it in math and science classes, for goodness sake. I mean, how 2 + 2 = 4 has anything to do with critical race theory is beyond me, but they find a way. Yeah.
I just had a question about the employment thing. So, not that you're giving us legal advice, but if we're being threatened with the idea of you're going to be fired if you're not vaccinated,
Mm-hmm.
would good legal advice be to make them pull the trigger on that? Because then you have...
Well, again, I can't make that call for anybody. Should somebody just make them pull the trigger? You have to decide your conviction and whether it's worth it for you or not. And if they do fire you, call. Yeah, All right. We've gone an hour and 15 here already. I know folks have a lot of things to do. I'll stick around if anybody has any other questions. I hope this has been helpful for everybody. I've really enjoyed doing it. Again, thank you to Maranatha for giving the opportunity. Thanks, folks. Uh-oh, Richard's going to say something. We're in trouble now. We're in trouble now.
No. I wanted to make sure I came here. I have pneumonia, and I still wanted to be here. Listen, these guys have to be funded. It's nice to sit here and bob your heads and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of the work they're doing is pro bono. I look them at as like a missionary for us, supporting them, the same kind of deal. They're fighting for us. And that's all I wanted to say to you. You know, he won't do it. He's the nicest guy, you know. I had my nephew call him. He wanted to open his gym in Michigan in July. And I said, you call David and talk to him. And gyms were closed. He opened both of his gyms July of last year. Nothing. Nobody bothered him. David gave some advice to do, and it worked out. And he's happy. In fact, he's coming next week. He's going to be sad he missed you. He can talk to you. Yes.
Well, thank you, Richard.
Yes. Now you're dismissed. But pick up a brochure so you know what to do.
Yep, grab a brochure back.